Hello, welcome. So thank you for joining us today to discuss what was a deliberately provocative topic that we chose to speak about. I think it's fair to say the industry's feeling a little bruised, whether it's directly, indirectly, but equally, it doesn't really feel like anybody knows what is next. There's lots of fear mongering and talk around AI and all these things, but you don't really hear many people talking about what we're actually going to see in the future. So we thought we'd take a look today at some areas mostly positive. We wanted to try and be positive. There's a few negatives in there maybe, and sort of talk about it from our respective areas of the business that we work in. So we're going to focus on IP nostalgia, emerging markets, or are they, and new players. We want to keep it interactive. So if throughout anybody has any opinions or questions, feel free to raise your hand and offer your opinion as well, because we think that this is a topic that everybody needs to be involved in. But to formally introduce ourselves on the panel who you're going to be listening to today. So my name's Charlotte. I've worked in the games industry for the past 14 years across business development, licensing, partnerships, commercial, strategy and growth. Most recently, I ran the revenue and commercial division at Team 17. And earlier this year, I decided to jump ship and go back and be my own boss. So I'm now working as a fractional CCO across businesses in gaming, AI, Unreal Engine expertise, and some studios that are developing original IP as well. And over to Megan.
Hi, so I'm Megan. I've actually made it to my 10-year anniversary in the last month. As one person for over 10 years, I've also been made redundant twice in those 10 years, and I've come through to the other side. My previous experience is Sega. I worked at Sega, Activision Blizzard, and Square Enix, and now I'm part of Keyword Studio, working in business development. So I have a lot of access to a lot of different publishers now. And I'm happy to be here with all of you today to talk about how we survived 2025. So I think that leads nicely on. So who here has been victimized by 2025 this year? Yeah, that if you don't get that reference, we'll explain at the end. But, we didn't know what kind of audience we would get. Yeah. So, sorry, my thing's full. But I think with the way the world is going, and especially last week's news across a couple of businesses, including like Amazon and, Square Enix, it's still ongoing. And, it always feels like we're taking small steps forward and then like falling backwards. So, we kind of pulled this together because we wanted to look back at what can the industry do to change or kind of adapt to these kind of situations over time. So, yeah.
And one of those things we think is interesting and sort of part of the discussion and potentially why we're seeing some sort of, rumors around cancellation or changes in strategy is lots of people sort of think that we're moving towards like a Hollywood remake era for the games industry, much like Hollywood did, where they would just remake old films and repurpose them for the modern era. Lots of people are suggesting that that's kind of the place we're heading to. And partly, I think it's because it's less risky for publishers. The audiences exist, their greenlighting process is far more simple, forecasting, all that kind of stuff. And I guess we sort of couldn't decide whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, or actually are there some things within that being the sort of the strategy that people are taking that could flip it on its head and actually mean that we have really exciting content over the next 5 years that does have that sort of IP, nostalgia-fueled IP consumer habits. And so the data shows, which we found really interesting, that lots of players who buy remakes actually never played the original. So it is finding new audiences. And does that suggest remakes are not purely nostalgia bait, but actually reaching these new audiences? So is it not all the negativity we see around remakes? Is it actually finding new players? And I think, Megan, you were talking about sort of Resident Evil and some of the success that Capcom's seen with that franchise and how that looks.
Yeah, I think Capcom have definitely been one of the publishers that are thriving right now. And just by looking at their catalogue, they've nailed what they need to do to continue their business without making, losing talent within their companies and also kind of pushing it forward. So if you take Resident Evil series, they basically remade their whole franchise and pulled in brand new audience, which in turn leads to them continuing the series on with Resident Evil 9, which looks amazing. And then we kind of think, like, what can companies do to really like drive their IP forward and bring like new audiences in? If you take a look at like Borderlands, what they did was they took a beloved character, Tiny Tina, and gave her standalone game, which met positive reviews. Loads of people loved the game, and it brought in, again, a new audience who may have not played Borderlands before, but decided to play Tiny Tina. And I'm feeling now like kind of we were discussing earlier about like the Mandalorian. It's part of a universe. So maybe the games industry needs to, instead of just doing remakes, look at what they can pull from these IPs and bring them forward so they can drive like more interaction with their player base and, you know, in turn build more transmedia out of it as well. You know, if you look at like Borderlands has got its own TV show and or movie, I forgot which one it was. And then you've also got like The Last of Us. So what can we be doing within our franchises and IP to making them, you know, ever growing, everlasting?
And I think, I mean, the term that I think the movie industry uses, below deck characters. So how do you find those characters within an existing universe and then shine a light on them, like The Mandalorian, like Andor? How do we encourage game studios to look, you know, deep within the lore of the universes that they've created, to bring out not just remakes, but actually maybe new adventures, new chapters that audiences want, actually spend the time sort of reviewing the content and coming up with those concepts. I think it would be cheaper as well to do that. You know, it's obviously it's internal IP. I think the big challenge there that we would like to see in the next 5 years is a democratization of IP for indie developers to access IP. You know, when you speak to companies that will remain nameless, but some of the major IP holders out there, you know, you're looking at a minimum of a $250,000 a year MG just to have access to the IP. So just to be able to start iterating and developing. I've worked on games that cost maybe 4 times that to bring to market in terms of total dev cost, and have gone on to be hugely successful, you know, really small teams that are really talented. And I think if you gave these indie devs access to some of the IP to look at these sort of new universes or new concepts, you could then really see some really exciting projects coming out and avoid this whole Hollywood boring sort of remake era that people feel that we're teetering into. You know, a company I'm working for at the minute is actively trying to do that with a tool to sort of help IP be more accessible and easier for developers to iterate on in a canon safe way. And I think that's something we really think is an important step in this era. I also think we were talking earlier about, you know, how we also think potentially that we need to stop making games for people our age and start looking at the audience coming through. And I think that's the other thing with this remake thing, is it's sort of targeting a pool of consumers that we know very well, but it's not thinking about, you know, Gen Z or even the generation below that, and how would they want to interact with a Resident Evil game. You know, what I imagine it's a very different playing experience than what we would go out and buy and spend hours dedicating to.
Yeah. I guess if you look at like what games are popular, especially with the kind of, let's just say, a range of like 8 to 18, it's usually things like Fortnite, Roblox, kind of evolving games where it's all about IP licensing. So if you take a look at like Fortnite, I think Wednesday has just gone in there. Now, it's well renowned that Wednesday is a very expensive IP, anything to do with the Addams family. So, you know, it's keeping player engagement. So kids are going to be spending like 4 hours an evening on one game, and it's going to be Fortnite or Roblox. So I think we need to kind of adapt as an industry and figure out how more modern games can get involved in kind of that IP driven space.
And I think, to say the word that keeps cropping up when everyone talks about the future, AI will play a part in it. Obviously, there's huge battles going on at the minute with AI and IP infringement. You know, I think I was at something a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of people seem to think that we're going to face sort of the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot of AI slop in terms of games being created that are churned out in, like, you know, a matter of weeks, released, And then we're going to have such an influx of these. The person who said it likened it to cat videos on TikTok. At the minute there's loads of AI cat videos, and you can now tell if it's not a real cat video, and people are like, I just want real cat videos again. I want to see actual real cats doing silly things and not these, spoof ones. And I think we're going to go through the same path with games, where ultimately people are going to get sick of AI generated, slop, as it's called, and they're going to want human crafted experiences. Yes, AI might be in the base of that, but how do we make sure that it's got that made by a human stamp on it when it comes to market? And I think that combined with licensed IP doing new and creative things is something that we think will, help the industry thrive, over the next 5 years and sort of get out of survival mode. And it's something we would encourage major IP holders to think about when they're looking at their IP and their strategy for it, and democratizing it for indie devs. Anything else you want to say?
On IP? Maybe not.
All the secrets that she's working on. So the next topic that we thought was quite interesting is around sort of emerging markets. I think this year, and a lot of people have attributed some of the changes in the industry to emerging markets such as China and Saudi Arabia. I think the truth is they're not, you can't call them an emerging market anymore, certainly not when it comes to game sales. I think 20% of all sales on the best-selling games on Steam this year have been based Chinese customers. So if you're building a game now, releasing it on Steam and want it to be successful, if you don't have a strategy for China, you're leaving potentially 20% of revenue on the table. So we don't think they can be classed as emerging.
No,
anymore.
Definitely not. And if you think about how the China market works, I'm sure if any developers or publishers have been here, you've probably been review bombed if you haven't got the Chinese language as part of your game, especially if you're like a AAA kind of title. It's always good to consider like those very small things like languages in your game as well, especially they're the ones that are going to be playing it. So yeah, no, if you think about like Black Myth Wukong that came out, that kind of came out of nowhere. I was like, what is this game? And then everyone's kind of playing it. And again, it's all these kind of like games from China where they're really trying to adapt and, drive a more Western market to their games. And it's something I'm seeing within BD now. I've done a lot of mobile over the past year. And one thing that I want to try and do is work with more Japanese clients. And, I know Japan is already a very big established market within gaming. But one thing I've noticed from anywhere around kind of Asia is that they are struggling to adapt their games for Western audiences because they have no clue per se in terms of mobile. Like one thing they will do over there is illegal in Europe, so it's kind of finding like the right clients to match with it and kind of using the expertise to adapt to certain cultures as well. So, and if you driving forward with that, and to stay on the topic of mobile, like India is huge for mobile. And, I think Call of Duty Mobile has like been outstanding, the amount of millions of players they've got over there. So as much as these are emerging markets, they're actually they're actually driving more revenue from.
Well, I think, and for the industry in the next 5 years, I think we have to treat them as just markets now and not emerging. It's in particular China on PC, and yeah, if you've got a mobile game, India is part of your strategy there. But I think what you said, Megan, about I think with the market growing, I think what we're going to see is more of their content or content based on more cultural references within those markets coming to us, which I think is exciting. And I know there's a lot of cynicism around Saudi's investment into games. I think the EA news was kind of weird, and the fact that the Trump family is somehow involved in it made it even weirder. But I know that from a few developers who I've met who are actually based out in Saudi Arabia, they've taken investment from Saudi, the Savvy Games group out there, and they are building this sort of ecosystem of developers there. And some of them are able to build content based on sort of Middle Eastern culture. They're building games that they wouldn't get to make otherwise, which I think is exciting. So I do think the Saudi investment has a slight tinge of we don't know what they're doing. We were talking earlier about EA and the size of that portfolio is so vast, and some of the games in there, what are they going to do with them? How is that going to sit in the next 5 years? Have they just bought it for the FIFA license and things like that, the sports licenses? But I think we're going to see sort of this transvergence of hopefully more interesting content coming to our market from those markets as those markets have matured.
Yeah, no, especially with kind of, continuing it on with like Sims from EA. It's a beloved game of mine, and I know the community has struggled with the news, with the kind of buyout, because Sims is banned in Saudi Arabia. So it's very interesting, like a company buys a catalogue of games where one of them is outright banned. So, it's a lot of uncertainty, but right now, like at this point, like we need to just wait and see how things develop and maybe not be as negative. I know we can be quite negative people. I know I can be, but yeah, one thing, we just need to wait for these wait and see what happens. And, I think we need to start listening more as well to what the community is saying. And I think that's extremely important. I think the community has kind of lost their kind of soundboard to kind of say what they think and what they want in games. And at the minute, it's become just about profit, really.
Yeah. And I think, some of those emerging markets, obviously that's hugely linked to it. But it's interesting what you say about the community as well, because I guess if you are building for these audiences, you then need to be sensitive in building communities in ways that at the minute we're probably not that skilled in doing, from offices based in the UK or in Europe. So we need to sort of think about that as part of our strategy as well. But I think, I think the landscape over the next 5 years in terms of investment, I imagine we will see more from Saudi. I think we'll see Saudi's gaming ecosystem grow. I think there's some interesting things with China's sort of divestment from certain businesses, particularly in North America. And I think we'll start seeing the Chinese market mature in terms of development and content that it will be putting out that will then see success in the West. So there's probably a double-edged sword to that in terms of potentially more layoffs in some areas where there have been those investments, but I think we will start seeing interesting content, which hopefully inspires different content coming out of those emerging markets. And the other topic we kind of wanted to look around, which I've always feel is, and something I always scratch my head over, especially when I was working at Team 17, and we touched on it earlier, is around like evolving player habits, but also audiences. How are they changing the like very fabric of our industry? If you look at, as Megan was saying, what game kids now are playing, most of them will say they spend time on Fortnite, Roblox, or Minecraft. They're not interested in playing sort of single player games and putting hours into it. Some do, but I think it's a very different way of playing. It's much more sort of snackable, jumping in one experience for 20 minutes, then into another, then into another. I think it's far more sort of what you said, time rich versus time poor, which I think has always been a factor in how people choose to buy and play games. But I don't feel like we're prepared to market to or develop for, in some ways, en masse, the new consumer group that is ultimately going to be coming through and who in 5 years' time are going to be hopefully earning money and buying what we're putting out there. And yeah, I don't know if you want to elaborate a little bit more on some of the stuff we were.
Yeah, so I've been having a lot of conversations recently, just to kind of echo what you were saying. We're really not listening to players. We're a bit tone deaf right now. I'm not saying I'm just talking general, the industry. I'm a gamer myself. I've been playing games since my parents let me decide. When they first got my console, my dad built me my PC, but I wanted a PS1 because everyone had a PS1. Not many kids had a PC. But, looking back, like, kids just want to play kids' games, and that is all about IP. I think parents are quite happy to be like, oh, let's spend £10 here, £10 there on Fortnite. That's their pocket money. Like, how do we compete with things like Fortnite, Roblox, and Minecraft? And yeah, I think we need to take it back a little bit. And it goes back to kind of IP driven. Everything is based around what's popular right now. So what was it? Labubu. I've got a Labubu. Let's talk about Labubu. So essentially, if Labubu got made into a game, it would make a shit ton of money. Let's face facts. Like if that was a mobile game, it would drive so much business because that's what's popular now. And I think the games industry is a little bit slow to kind of, we talk about being fast paced. We're not. We hear Battle Royale is coming in game space, and then everyone is making Battle Royale. Everyone's got to drop everything to get it out. I was working on Black Ops 4 at the time. So I feel like these things are becoming fads. Like it's like throwaway fashion, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like Shein, if people know what Shein is. It's cheap clothing brands where people can just buy new stuff and then throw it out after a few months and then get the next craze. And I feel that's what the games industry is becoming. So if you've got a successful online multiplayer game, the best way you can do is always keep throwing in new. And I think that's where it's going wrong, where with single player games, I know we've got the looming GTA 6 over our heads. I think everyone's going to be changing their dates again because they consistently watch. But that's one thing.
To be honest, that could have been the name of our panel. We survived 2020. Now what? GTA 6 is coming.
GTA 6 is coming.
We'll all be fine.
Because essentially GTA 6 is going to smash records. And there is nothing we can do about that. That game's going to be amazing. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to contribute to and it's going to make the industry look amazing, but it's only Rockstar and Take-Two which will look amazing. But even with that said, like, I feel like I still love solo player games. I just think we need to go back to the nostalgia. Like, again, what can we take from this IP instead of just doing a like for like remake and make it all look shiny and all the characters look, the uncanny valley, and you're kind of sitting there playing this immersion. But what about the depth into it? What can we take from this IP and make it new to drive those new player base and get people to stop playing Fortnite this evening and play your solo player game? So I do think we need to start listening a lot more. And it's a shame because a lot of the jobs that have been affected, especially this year, have been community and marketing, where we need these people. We need people from around the world. We need to make sure we know our markets, and we can't do that unless we've got talented people kind of, researching and developing kind of ideas, always being on the know. Like, are you reading through the games industry news every morning while you're having your coffee before you start checking your emails for disappointment or happiness, like trying to find those buzzers? And it's one thing I want to see as a gamer. I want to see, I want to stop hearing about Fortnite. I want to hear about this new thing and this new IP craze, or this company's taking a big risk and, taking like a very low, let's just say a cult classic game. I'm trying to think of one right now. I can't off the top of my head. I've kind of gone off on a tangent here. But say if they've taken a game that was a cult classic, but it flopped. Let's take Sleeping Dogs. Amazing game, by the way. Would recommend. That game has so much potential, but it's kind of just sat there now because they were like, let's go make Triad Wars and we're going to make an online game because that's what they want. And it's like, no, we literally wanted Sleeping Dogs 2. That's all we wanted. But because it was a commercial flop, it's been sat there. Mm. Whereas I'm like, I don't see it as a flop. I see it as a potential to actually drive into bigger things. So, it's basically GTA in Hong Kong. So it tries something new. They were like, oh, it didn't work commercially, so we're going to bin it. No, don't bin it. Like, look at what went wrong and how you can take the good parts and then kind of drive it further down the line. And I wish more publishers would do that, but it's less about risk taking now and keeping the lights on.
And maybe that's the other big change from this on, is like, what does the publisher of the future look like? I've always said if I had a checkbook to start my own, which I would, if anybody has one, let me know. I'd love to. I feel like I would have a team of, your marketing team would be more community based, and you would have people who are digital natives on these platforms like TikTok, Discord, Reddit, you wouldn't necessarily have sort of the structure that exists in most publishers now, doing these sort of more traditional marketing techniques to reach those players. And also, you need the listening. I worked on a game at Team 17 called Sworn, and the way that game came about, which is why it was so interesting and why we chose to publish it, was the developers actually built a Discord community of Hades fans. And they just soundboarded this community to asking them, what do you like about Hades? What don't you like? What would you like to see from a Hades game? They then took all of that and they basically made Sworn, which was Hades with multiplayer. And they sort of canvassed and built this game from pure community seeding as an original new IP. And I think that's a really good blueprint. I mean, it's not going to work every time, but I think, we need to see more of that. And I think that's where, the concept behind this panel is we survived, but it's about now what is, how do we change it? We can't just keep doing the same thing and expecting the same results. We need to really look at, what IP do we have in our locker that we're not using and we've just let sort of die because it wasn't a commercial success first time around. How do we reignite that? How do we seed it maybe with lower market tests? You don't have to go out and always be developing 10, 20, $50 million games. You could do something with an indie team, much smaller, and see how it works and then build from that. And I think, it's good. I think that the GTA 6 thing is both a blessing and a curse because, high tides rise all ships. You're going to have new players. The console market always does well out of games that big, so the install base is going to go up. Obviously, the PC version will come at a later point. So I think we will see the ripple effects of that eventually. It's obviously going to be really challenging for people next year in that market because it will just suck all the time, money and noise for anybody, probably for at least 6 months afterwards, if not more. I know I've spent time trying to forecast it, and it's hard to sort of to think about the impact it's going to have. But I think we really think, like, in summary, to sort of wrap up the panel before we go to any questions, that the next 5 years is all about changing and not necessarily building net new IP. We obviously still want to see that. But sort of actually there's so much stuff that we have as an industry that is so powerful that we could harness, and putting it in the right hands of the right creatives and the right teams could be the next huge success. But unless we try it, we're not going to know. And I think we've just fallen into this sort of profit, risk averse, sort of area combined with some of the layoffs and the negative news we've seen. And it just feels a little bit sad sometimes. But actually there's huge potential, for us to really go out and do some
I want
cool
to see
things.
some more risks.
Yeah.
I also want to see some new blood in the industry. Like we need to encourage. I'm sure there's a lot of people leaving uni trying to get jobs, and they've studied game design or whatever their dream is to get into the games industry, and they're being blocked by, there is so many people with years of experience who are also looking for jobs who are probably taking huge pay cuts right now just to keep their lights on. So, I think the industry it's been a bit of a bloodbath. But I'm hoping to see that it's only going to lead to growth over the next 5 to 10 years. And also, if you have been affected this year, you're not going through it alone. Like, there is so many support systems out there. There is always going to be jobs. And the only thing I can say is that I hope the companies have done their final. We're not going to be out of it yet, but we'll see you next year for Surviving 2026, and we'll do a recap and see what happens. But yeah, no, I really hope we see growth, but I also just want to see some risks, and I want new talent in the industry. We need new ideas, and we need people to start challenging the status quo.
That's probably us. Thank you.
Done.
Hello. Is there someone who wants to share an aspect, an opinion, or ask a question? No.
Also, what is everyone wanting to see over the next couple of years?
Yes.
Tell us what you want. Let's hear it.
We need the mic to be working. Hello?
It's mine. Yes, yes. Okay. So I promised a question. So here it comes. So how about, so we talked about, you covered everything very nicely about emerging markets, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that on the investor side, they will take more risks in 2026? Or is it too early still?
I think it's way too early. But I hope there's going to be some risk takers. But I think everything's about rebuilding now more than
I think
risks.
I don't think risks. I mean, that's the whole purpose of venture capital is it's meant to be risk driven. Yes, you want returns, but you're meant to be, looking at new ventures, new concepts. And again, I think I'm trying to raise at the minute. It's really hard. To find people, who, everything is, it's too early, come back when you're making more revenue or you've got more traction. And it's that real chicken and egg thing of, but how can we, until we've got the investment to go out and prove it? And it feels quite often like it's just like a boilerplate response, and I think, that's another thing. I think it's still too early, but there is investment and there is capital out there. It's just how it's being harnessed, and I think the metrics now are much harder. I think lots of people said the silly money came into the industry like pre-COVID, and now people are realizing if you wanted to start an esports team in 2020 and go out and raise £5 million to back it, you could. I don't think that's possible now. So I think the appetite is still there, but I think the metrics are much harder, and you almost being pre-revenue now I think isn't really an option for a lot of businesses. I think you have to have something really demonstrable. So that's my current experience. So I can't see it changing into next year drastically.
Damn it.
Yeah, fingers crossed somebody will come along. But yeah.
And then I had another question about the emerging markets. You talked a little about China and stuff. How about, for example, so what we've seen for the last couple of years, like we have now Gamescom Asia, Gamescom LATAM. We still don't have a Gamescom Africa, right? So what about Africa?
I think we've spoken about this before. So yeah, I spent about 6 months living in Cape Town a couple of years ago, and it's really interesting. PlayStation doesn't exist in that market. Like Xbox has full control of the console market. But also lots of players in Southern Africa in particular, I can't comment sort of on Central or North, they don't have access to servers. The server infrastructure isn't there for them to play like online games that are, in any way that's sort of competitive or meaningful. So they feel quite, I think, isolated from a lot of that. I know when I was there, Amazon was starting to build out in South Africa in particular and building data centers there. So I think we'll start seeing more growth there. But mobile is huge there. And there's a lot of games being developed now as well out of the African market. I think that the development talent, especially in places like Nigeria, is quite impressive. So again, I think hopefully we start seeing more emerging there. But I think the infrastructure isn't necessarily there to support our current industry. So that's probably something that needs to be looked at. I don't know if you've seen anything from the African market.
I play with a lot of people in Africa in Final Fantasy 14, actually.
Okay, maybe
there's a whole community
then
on Final Fantasy 14 where they're all from South Africa, around like kind of Cape Town area.
Okay.
So I think I guess it's location-wise. So we actually worked in distribution for the PC market. And we always thought, wow, Russia's huge and Turkey's huge. These are emerging markets. But it turns out it was just Europeans buying in Turkish lira because it was like a fraction of the price. So all this data we've been collecting about emerging markets was a load of shit. Because people were paying, like £5 for a £40 game in Turkey. And then it was like, well, we need to lock down everything. And then at that point, then it completely restricted the game sales. So
I think we had one time where one big AAA game sold more copies in Norway than there probably is the population of Norway. Because the currency was favourable. So, yeah.
You know what? Fair dues to the publisher, because they called us. They were like, oh, we've broken a record. We must have done. We've sold more copies in Norway than there are population. And we were like, oh, that's a weird because we were like, oh, Scandinavia is emerging market again. No, it's just Europeans looking to save £10 on a video game. So that was a whole nother ballpark. So I think for sales, like what I want to see is just more variety of games. I want people to, and again, it's about the indie market that's so important and integral to the kind of games industry, because the indies are making games that are, I think there was a cooking game, a cute little indie cooking game. I've forgotten the name. I think it was up for a lot of awards. And I think it was Persian maybe, and it was like cooking as a family, and it was very cute. And I was like, this is kind of nice. It brings in culture, but I guess you're not going to see it like with a lot of AAA games. Hopefully, maybe somehow.
I saw some raising hands over there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Robin from Gamescom Dev, and I would like to know what you make out of recent, really well-received games like Clair Obscur, Silksong, Blueprints, which is not big IP, but rather new IPs, and exactly what you were asking for with taking more risks and thinking outside.
I think it's amazing. Like, I think it's fantastic, and obviously to celebrate those successes and those teams and, looking at them and learning from them. I think you want to see that. For those, there's thousands of others that, sadly don't reach that level of commercial success. And I think you don't want that to be a deterrent. I mean, another topic we were thinking of covering today, but didn't, is, how many games are too many games? I think that's another thing that's, there's so many people now. I think the barrier to entry for releasing a game on Steam in particular is so low that, most people can sort of do it and then expect to be one of those big breakout successes. And that isn't possible. There's a lot of blood, sweat and tears that obviously goes into it to get it to that level. And they are breakout hits, but they're built by, very successful, passionate teams. So I think we should learn from them. I think we obviously, alongside the IP conversation, we still want to see original IP like that breaking through, and those teams then using that to go on and build other experiences. From that experience, they've had to bring that to market. But I think, that I think we need to move away from treating them as breakout hits and kind of actually just really successful projects by really successful teams, and stop using them as a blueprint and thinking you can go and sort of replicate the same with a team of 5 people. I don't think it's, some of the stats around those games I think have been a bit misleading in terms of how they've been developed and actually what's gone into them in terms of marketing and how they've been brought to market. But a lot of it's community as well. That comes back to what you were saying. So the success of those games is very much driven around their community strategy and how they've nurtured that over long periods of time. They're not really breakout if you went back into the history of how they've built that up to make them that successful.
Silksong had me in fits of laughter. Like, the community was hilarious. Like, Jeff Keighley's on stage talking, they're like, announce Silksong. And you're like, it's becoming more like a chant than, oh, this happened before GTA 6. Oh, we got, sorry, I keep thinking of Labubu now. It's in my head. It is true, they're demons. So yeah, it's always like, I was just so impressed with the community hype with Silksong that I wanted to play Silksong. I haven't played it yet, so I'm a naughty person. But the community driving behind these kind of titles is clearly where we need to go. Like, we need to listen to our community. We need to give back, and we've got to stop making games for us, but for them. So yeah, I'm hoping to see more, I don't want to say breakouts. I've worked on a game which was critically successful, like really high Metacritic, but it just didn't make revenue. And it's because one of the big factors of the letdown behind it was the marketing budget was too low. And we only had enough to get a couple of influencers and drive it. But that game was stunning, and it should be everywhere. So yeah, community and marketing are very important parts where, I feel they're a bit bruised right now. So hoping people pump more into them. I do hope publishers don't stop investing in indie games as well, because they need money, and we need those kind of people to keep the industry ticking.
Did I miss someone? No. All right, you guys. Thank you so much. It was so great listening to you. You should think about starting a podcast. It was really nice.
Everyone keeps saying this, and we've never got around to it. Maybe we
Trust
should.
the community, right?
Trust the community.
All right. Thank you,
you.
Megan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. This is your applause.
Thank you.